This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next, so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now, you call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
Slowly the soldiers moved with lagging steps, dreading that they had crossed the spreading globe only to pass into forbidden realms in defiance of nature and heaven. But Hannibal was having none of it. Not for him any terror of the Alps, not for him any horror of the snows. "Shame on you," he cried, "to weary of fame and despair of the favour of the gods. Shall we retreat after all we have won before snow-capped mountains, cowed and beaten by cliffs? No, comrades, no. Onwards we go. Believe me, that soon we shall be scaling the walls of Rome, that mightiest power, and the steep hill of Jupiter." At which all his men cheered and found their courage restored. So that was Silius Italicus. The Punica is the name of that poem. He wrote it almost 300 years after Hannibal's invasion of Italy in the reign of the Emperor Domitian. Tom, it's the longest surviving Roman poem. It was beautifully read, I thought.
I was magnificent.
Thank you. That's kind.
Yeah, really good.
It's a shame I had to prompt it, but I'll take it all the same. Now, it's proof, isn't it, of just how deeply the experience of fighting Hannibal and the personality of Hannibal were seared into the Roman imagination. And actually, you get the sense there of their massive respect for Hannibal. You know, he's not we talked last time about whether or not they see him as a supervillain. Maybe they do, but they clearly see him as a serious person, as somebody worthy of admiration as well as fear.
Absolutely. And they always acknowledge his supreme genius as a general. And there's kind of certain self-serving quality to that, because obviously if he's the world's greatest general and they've beaten him, that redounds very well to their credit. But I think that what you see there, and also what you see in that passage from Juvenal that you read, again, very beautifully in the previous episode. So you've got an epic poet in the form of Silius Italicus, you've got a satirist in the form of Juvenal, and what they're both fixing on, in particular, as emblematic of everything that makes Hannibal extraordinary, is this feat in crossing the Alps. And it makes Hannibal seem like Hercules, which is part of Hannibal's plan. That was what he was kind of going for. Makes him seem superhuman. And to climb the Alps, to fend off all the predatory barbarians that lurk in its snowy wastes, to gaze down from a mountain pass at the fields of Italy, impossible. And yet Hannibal has done it.
Yeah.
And we left him at the end of our previous episode. He's climbed all the way up the Alps. He's reached the very summit of the pass that he's been aiming for. And he's telling his men, it's brilliant. Here we are. There's nothing to worry about. Italy lies below us. Let's get down there and take the fight to the Romans.
Exciting. So we're in 218 BC, aren't we? Second Punic War. Hannibal is, his great strategy is that He's not going to wait for the Romans to attack him. He's going to go for it. He's going to get into Italy. He's going to separate them from their allies. And his aim is Rome itself, an amazing ambition for a Carthaginian general.
And so his men, who are very kind of demoralized, they've all got frostbite, they're hungry, they've been attacked by Gauls all the time, all a bit miserable. When they get to this pass, Hannibal, according to Livy, gives his men a very positive briefing. And he says, it will be very easy going from this point on. There are no more hills to climb, a battle or two, and we will have Rome in the palm of our hands. But of course, Dominic, anyone who has climbed a very steep hill will know that actually going down can sometimes be as tough on the legs as going up.
This is a great act of imagination by you, which all great historians have, because you, of course, have never been to the Alps. And yet you can imagine that it's very difficult to go down them.
Yes, and particularly with an elephant. And that's the power of imagination, Dominic.
Well, it's not just imagination, it's about your sifting of the sources, isn't it?
For sure.
Doesn't Polybius, the Greek historian, tell us that it was very difficult and lots of people fell off the mountain as they went down the hill?
Shall I read the passage in which he says exactly that?
Yeah.
So Polybius says, so this is about the descent and how treacherous it proves. The track which led down the mountainside was both narrow and steep. And since neither the men nor the animals could be sure of their footing on account of the snow, any who stepped wide of the path or stumbled overbalanced and fell down the precipices.
Yeah.
And this is obviously very bad news for horses or elephants if they slip, because they're really going to make a din. However, it's got to be done. And as they go down, the snows start to kind of melt a bit, and they start seeing pines and other foliage clinging to the rocks.
Mm-hmm.
And it all looks to be going great. And then suddenly there's a massive traffic jam. And Hannibal is not at the front of the column, but suddenly, elephants are piling up, and horses and mules and Spaniards and Balearic slingers and everything. And so he's forcing his way through this ever narrowing path to see what the problem is. And he discovers ahead of him the debris of two separate landslides. And the first landslide has carried away an entire stretch of the mountain, so the face of the mountain. And the second one has kind of added to the general impassability of this path that they've got to take down. And it's clear to Hannibal immediately that there's no way that the horses, or let alone the elephants, can get past it. And most of his men won't be able to either. The situation is very, very tricky because there are rockfalls, there's still snow. You can't go forward. There's no detours that are possible. So it's kind of very, going on a bear hunt. They can't go over it. They can't go under it. They've somehow got to find a way to go through it.
Yeah.
So what Hannibal does, he orders his men to retreat to a ridge that's looking over this kind of blockage of debris, to clear it of snow, to make camp there. And then he thinks, well, what am I going to do? And it's been mentioned by Juvenal in that passage that you read the previous day, where he talks about how Hannibal dissolves rock with vinegar. And if there are scientists listening, perhaps they could let us know if this is actually feasible or not. But I'll report what Livy says. Livy says that the job that faces Hannibal is to essentially to clear away the rubble and somehow construct a new path out of the precipice, out of the kind of the sheer wall of rock, because there's no other way down. So they have to cut through the rock. And the way that Hannibal does this is he solves it by the ingenious application of heat and moisture. Large trees were felled and lopped and a huge pile of timber erected. This, with the opportune help of a strong wind, was set on fire. And when the rock was sufficiently heated, the men's rations of sour wine were flung upon it to render it friable. So that's the vinegar. The wine essentially has become vinegar. They then got to work with picks on the heated rock and opened a sort of zigzag track to minimize the steepness of the descent. And you can see why this is a feat that particularly resonates with Hannibal's enemies. And to his admirers, it must have seemed an astonishing feat to carve a road out of the sheer rock. I mean, it really is the kind of the stuff of a Greek hero.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly there is a measure of truth to this. There clearly was a landslide, because otherwise it's hard to see why these reports would have come from.
So they do get down. They're must be incredibly hungry at this point, because they presumably have been delayed on the mountain and they've, running short of rations and stuff, and it's raining and snowing and all this kind of thing. But finally they do get down, and all is sweetness and light, right? They arrive in these valleys, and we're told that it's sunny and there's streams, and they can or have a rest and sort of flop down by the side of a bank of a river or whatever. And what's the plan then? That presumably they're just going to go for it. They're going to strike south towards the sort of the plain of the Po, towards what's now Turin and stuff.
I mean, I think even Hannibal recognizes that there's an absolute need for everybody to recharge their batteries. So it's not just the men who are shattered. Obviously, the horses, the mules, the elephants, there hasn't been much food up on the mountains. So they're put out to pasture. The troops are given 3 days R&R. And as you say, they come out kind of pretty near where Turin stands now. And it had taken them in all just over a fortnight, so 15 days to cross the Alps. And it had been 5 months since the army's departure from New Carthage in Spain. And the whole expedition had come at terrible cost. So by Polybius's reckoning, 50,000 infantry had left the Pyrenees, and of these, only about 20,000 remain. So over half have perished on the route. And of the 9,000 horses, only 6,000 remain.
Wow.
So what Hannibal had done was summed up later by another great general who led his troops over the Alps and was portrayed famously as doing such by David, the great painter of the French Revolution. That was Napoleon. And Napoleon, of course, very, very aware of Hannibal's example. And he said of this crossing of the Alps that Hannibal had sacrificed half his army merely to acquire his chosen field of battle, the opportunity to fight where he wished to. And I guess kind of hanging in that comment, perhaps people might think, well, was it worth all the effort that Hannibal went to? Was it worth the loss of over half his army? And Dominic, you said in the previous episode, you asked, would it have been possible for Hannibal to fight Scipio on the banks of the Rhone?
Yeah.
He could have done that. But that's not actually what Napoleon is saying. Napoleon's comments on Hannibal sacrificing half his army to get where he wanted to get his chosen field of battle is not meant as a criticism. I mean, this is the kind of thing Napoleon did all the time. He'd sacrifice hundreds of thousands of men to get his army into the position where he wanted to fight. Because what Napoleon is recognizing, and is clearly the case, is that by bypassing Scipio, by refusing to meet the Romans on the Rhine, by getting into Italy, Hannibal has kept the initiative.
But Tom, can I jump in and make an observation?
Yeah, of course.
We compared Hannibal, or you compared him in a previous episode, to Charles XII of Sweden, a commander who has a lot in common with Hannibal and with Napoleon. They're swashbuckling, they're charismatic, they captivate all Europe, they take the initiative, they sacrifice a lot of men for an advantage. And the other thing that all three have in common is they all end up losing. And they do that partly because they throw away men thinking, well, vim and vigor matter more than manpower. But the Romans could have told all three of those people that manpower matters more than anything.
And that is exactly the challenge that Hannibal recognizes. Hannibal absolutely appreciates that it is the manpower that the Romans have that is the huge problem. And that's why he's come to Italy, because his only prospect of defeating Rome is to secure the backing of people in the peninsula of Italy.
Okay, that's interesting. So he's sacrificing men now to gain men later. That's his thinking.
Absolutely, because his arrival in Italy is designed to terrify and intimidate the Romans, which it does. And the moment he arrives in Italy, there's a desperate summons goes from Rome to Sempronius Longus, the consul who is in Sicily with a large task force getting ready to invade Africa. That immediately gets called back. So that's one thing that Hannibal has gained. But the other thing that Hannibal's arrival does is that it hugely impresses people who are naturally hostile to Rome, of which the most significant are the Gauls, who live on the Italian side of the Alps. And Hannibal has to project the aura of a man who can genuinely defeat the Romans, because otherwise the Gauls won't rally to his cause. But if they do, there are large numbers of them. It's more than possible, as we will see, for Hannibal to get the size of his army back to what it had been when he left the Pyrenees.
So this achievement of coming down from the Alps, something that people would have thought impossible, especially as he's done it with a load of elephants, presumably he knows perfectly well that as a PR coup, as a propaganda coup, nothing could be better fitted to impress the people he wants to recruit.
Yeah, so quote Eve MacDonald, who wrote a wonderful book about Hellenistic life. As news of his approach reached the Roman population, it must have seemed like the coming of a supernatural force. But I think you can say the same about the Gauls, and that's just as important. So he's followed the road of Hercules as Hercules had done. He's descended from the snowy peaks, like a demigod, and he's done it with elephants. it is a stupefying achievement. And one of the measures of that is that we are talking about it, 2,200 years on.
The elephants don't all die. It's sometimes said they all died, but they didn't all die. Most of them survived the journey. Is that right?
We're not told how many survived, but it seems, I mean, essentially all of them pretty much seem to have survived.
Okay.
Again, their arrival creates such a sensation that the effort of bringing them, is entirely justified, I think, just with the kind of the reverberation of the news of what he's done. So now they are the emblem of everything that Hannibal is about, really. But having said that, obviously he has lost lots of men. I mean, and this potentially is a problem. But immediately, the moment he arrives, there's one tribe who are called the Insubres who do immediately flock to his banner. And Hannibal's very keen to demonstrate to other Gallic tribes that, he's a friend worth having. So he immediately takes the side of the Insubres against a rival tribe, storms their stronghold, demonstrates the fact that he's got the muscle to do what he says he's going to do. And the result of this is that more Gallic tribes across what's now northern Italy, the Po Valley, they pledge to join his banner. But there is a problem, which is that the vast majority of these tribes are separated from Hannibal by Scipio and his legion. Scipio, the consul, who has come back from Massilia, from Marseille, to try and block Hannibal's path and is now in the way between Hannibal and the reinforcements that he hopes to get from the Gallic tribes. Is this a problem for Hannibal? Actually, it isn't a problem. It's an opportunity. Because what he is always looking for, what's key to his strategy, is engaging the Romans in battle and hopefully destroying them. And the fact that he now has Scipio's legions in his path, brilliant, bring it on. He wants to win a decisive battle against the Romans before the winter season makes it absolutely impossible for campaigning to continue.
Right, because we're in late autumn at this point, presumably.
I mean, pretty much winter, actually. So the winter solstice is approaching. The snows are starting to blow now in the plains of northern Italy. So there isn't long before it will become impossible. So it's got to be done in a week or two, really, after Hannibal's arrived in Italy.
Okay. So where is Scipio at this point? Scipio is approaching from which direction?
So he's come up from the coast. So he's coming eastwards.
Right.
And he's now blocking Hannibal's path. And the first clash between the Romans and Hannibal's men to take place on Italian soil, it happens in the Po Valley. You've got snowstorms gusting across the plains. And so both sides, because the visibility is obviously very poor, send out their cavalry to reconnoiter. Mm-hmm. And the Roman cavalry is led by Scipio himself, and he has with him his young son, Publius Cornelius Scipio, who is a figure who will feature quite prominently in the later story of Hannibal. But for now, he's a very, very young man serving at the side of his father. And they go out and they run into the Numidian cavalry. And the Roman cavalry is pretty rubbish. The Numidian cavalry is the best in the world. And so Scipio and his cavalry retreat. They cross a river called the Tichinus. It's clear that they have lost this kind of opening skirmish, but it's not a disaster. Rome knows that its strength always lies in infantry. Who cares if a few cavalrymen get killed? So he joins up with his main body of men. They zigzag round. Scipio's trying to find the best spot, somewhere that's defensive, but will provide scope for prosecuting the war against Hannibal. And he finds it by a river called the Trebbia, and he sets up camp there. And what he is doing now is waiting for Sempronius and his men to arrive from Sicily.
So to unite the two big Roman forces.
Because he wants to make absolutely certain that he can crush Hannibal.
Okay. And Hannibal is camped nearby, isn't he? Now, the question, I guess, is at this point, we're in December, and normally both armies would retreat to winter quarters. Hannibal wants to force the issue, presumably to impress. He wants to smash the Romans to impress these Gauls that he's keen to bring over to his side. Is that what he's thinking?
Yeah, and even the news of the skirmish at the Tichinus, where Hannibal has won, wins him huge plaudits among the local Gauls. And now that the Romans have retreated from their path, lots of them can come and join Hannibal's cause. Within a very short time of Hannibal's arrival in Italy and his victory at the Tichinus, he came with 20,000 infantry. He's now up to about 28,000, 30,000 infantry with the Gauls coming in. He's up to about 10,000 cavalry. So again, this sense that The Gauls are swelling his numbers. And this is a huge problem, obviously, for the Romans, because it means now that Scipio wants to force a battle as quickly as possible to try and stop the Gauls from misbehaving. But he needs to wait for Sempronius to arrive.
And Sempronius finally pitches up from Sicily, doesn't he? He's sent his men on this kind of forced march. And now the Romans have far more infantry than Hannibal. So I'm looking at the notes, 38,000 to Hannibal's 28,000, although Hannibal has more cavalry and the Romans are always a little bit deficient in cavalry. But interestingly, Sempronius is also under pressure to force a battle because his consulship is coming to an end and he wants a victory to round off his time in office. So there you have the kind of political pressures of Rome, acting to sort of force the issue.
Yeah, so Polybius says that Scipio doesn't want to force a battle. Scipio's been wounded in the Ticinus, and this has invalided him out. So Sempronius is going to command, against Hannibal now. And Polybius says, Scipio thought it was a bad idea to have a battle. This, I think, is because Polybius ends up a member of the household of the Scipios. And so he's always looking to cast them in the best possible light.
Yeah.
It's clear, I think, that both consuls want a victory for the same reason, that it will redound to their glory before they have to lay down their office at the end of the year. But also, as we've been saying, they need to stamp Hannibal out quickly before the whole of Gallic North Italy rises up to his banner. So I think Polybius is wrong there. I think it's absolutely the Roman battle plan that they are going to force a battle. And Hannibal is fully aware of this. He knows that the Romans are essentially spoiling for a fight, because we've talked before about how he has an incredible mastery of intelligence and how the Romans see this as somehow cheating. And so they end up so spooked by Hannibal's ability seemingly to read their minds that they claim that he's been going around undercover, disguised with wigs of various colours and changes of clothing.
Isn't that a classic battle narrative, though, that the enemy king or commander disguised himself, as a troubadour and something, and like Alfred the Great did this, and so did this.
Yeah, but Romans wouldn't do that. That's not at all Roman behaviour.
No, I guess they wouldn't.
So it's very kind of Punic treachery, all that kind of thing.
But Hannibal is clever, and he's going to use their urgency against them. He knows that they're desperate to force the issue, and he's going to use that.
Yeah, and also the fact that it makes the Romans look bad if they're not going out and fighting. They don't want to look like wusses. And again, Hannibal understands that that's a key part of their psychology, that they're always keen to attack, always keen to take the initiative. And so he works out a battle plan that makes play with that. So the scene of the first great military clash between Hannibal and the forces of the Roman Republic. So it is dawn on a very wintry morning, shortly before the winter solstice. The Romans are camped on the floodplain of this river, the Trebbia. It's icy cold. There are gusts of sleet. And it's so early that the legionaries are only just starting to stir. And then suddenly, from the sentries on the watchtower of their camp, they hear cries, the blaring of trumpets, and it's obvious that there is an enemy attack. And Sempronius himself is summoned quickly to the ramparts, and he looks out, and he sees below that the attack is being launched by these terrifying Numidians, the much feared Numidian cavalry, and they're riding up to the camp, hurling spears, wheeling back, withdrawing, then coming back, firing more spears, and so on. And Sempronius, we're told by Polybius, is convinced that this must be the advance guard of Hannibal's main army who are coming towards him. And so, he doesn't want to be caught out. So he orders all his men to form ranks, to advance, and to chase off the Numidians. And Scipio, according to Polybius, how accurately or not, we don't know, says, hey, steady on. This could be a trick. The legionaries haven't had their breakfast. Dominic, they've got to have a breakfast.
I approve of Scipio. Scipio is a man of great sense.
But while Sempronius is saying, no, we haven't got time for breakfast. We need to get out there and crush the Carthaginians. So he orders his cavalry out to drive off the Numidians, who promptly start retreating before the advance of the Roman cavalry. And the legions, who are now in full battle formation, stomachs rumbling, wistfully thinking of bacon and eggs, start marching out into the sleety dawn across the floodplain towards the Trebbia.
And this is personal for you, isn't it, Tom? Because you told me before we started recording that you'd had a very poor breakfast at Greg's this morning.
Yeah.
So this is like it's no wonder that you're narrating this with such vim and vigor. I mean, this is total immersion for you.
Yeah, I really feel for the Romans. So out the Romans go, cavalry first, seemingly chasing off the Numidians. infantry behind, squelching through the mud down towards the river Trebbia. The Numidians splash their way through the river Trebbia. Roman cavalry follow. The infantry, now have to do the same. So they come out on the far bank. Not only have they not had any breakfast, they're now sodden. It's icy. Their tunics are starting to freeze to their legs. But they carry on marching forwards. They are aware that there might be a risk of an ambush. And so those on the right flank, as they're advancing towards the Carthaginians, are looking out for any clumps of trees, because they know that there is nothing that Gauls in particular enjoy more than hiding in trees and then pouncing out and attacking in the rear. But Dominic, there are no trees. There are no trees. So I'll give you Polybius's account of what there is of the landscape. The terrain is flat and featureless. There are no woods to be seen, only a watercourse with high overhanging banks that were densely overgrown with thorns and brambles. But obviously, there's no possibility that anyone could be hiding there, because that would just require supernatural qualities of deception and treachery to do something like that.
I think we can discount that watercourse with the thickly brambled banks, can't we?
Yes, no prospect at all of anyone hiding there. So ahead of them now, emerging through the sleet, the sun is, I guess, by this point, kind of struggling to emerge through the grey cloud. The Romans see the Carthaginian battle line. Infantry in the centre, as is traditional, cavalry on the wings, and a screen in front of the cavalry, the elephants. And the elephants are a sufficiently intimidating sight. This is unsettling.
Even if you had breakfast.
Exactly. The Carthaginians, the Romans start to realise, have the look of men who have had a nice breakfast.
Oh, no.
And apparently also they've protected themselves against the sleet by oiling themselves.
Would that protect you? I think that's laughable.
I always wondered about this. Apparently it is.
But if you're pouring with rain outside and you went out, smeared yourself in oil, people would laugh at you, I think.
Well, yeah, because I suppose we have, thermal underwear and things and waterproofs, which they probably didn't have. But if you didn't, maybe you could use oil. Anyway, this is what we're told. They look good. They're glowing. They're warm. They're well breakfasted. And so when a battle is joined, you might think the Romans are already defeated. Not a bit of it.
Oh.
Because they're just the best heavy infantry in the world. And also, of course, they outnumber the Carthaginian infantry. So they press forwards and they start doing their stuff. They start stabbing and eviscerating and slicing open the guts of the Spaniards and the Libyans and the Gauls who are facing them. And so guts start to spill out and it mingles with the mud and the slush and it becomes ever more slippery. I mean, a hideous sight, both sides fighting increasingly desperately. But meanwhile, on the wings, first the elephants and then the Carthaginian cavalry have rolled back the Roman cavalry, who were always outnumbered, but just find it impossible to fight against elephants and Numidians. And then they wheel in and start to attack the flanks of the Roman infantry. So there's a slight sense in which the Romans are, well, I mean, three sides of their formation is now kind of surrounded by Carthaginian forces.
Yeah.
And then, Dominic, suddenly in the Romans' rear, a terrible cry, and it is coming from the watercourse. You remember, with those brambles, and it's not just infantry that's been hidden there by Hannibal; it's horses as well. So the men have been lying there with their horses lying down. Some 2,000 Numidians, half of them cavalry, half infantry, and they've been stationed there under the command of Mago, who is Hannibal's younger brother. So in the film by Vin Diesel, I don't know who'd play him. He's a kind of hip young gun. Maybe Tom Holland. I don't know.
Tom Holland. You'd hate that though, wouldn't you?
No, I'd love it.
You'd absolutely hate that if Tom Holland was in a film about Carthage and Rome.
Anyway, Mago is brilliant, tremendous commander. The Numidians think it's hilarious that they've totally outsmarted the Romans. They go crashing into the rear of the Roman infantry, who are now basically surrounded. Unsurprisingly, the Roman line wavers, buckles, and then it collapses. All discipline is gone, and you have thousands of men fleeing back to the Trebbia any way that they can, trying to weave their way past the force of Numidians in their rear. And as they retreat, this is always when armies really suffer casualties. The elephants are trampling them down, the cavalry are galloping after them, hacking them down, and the slaughter is really terrible. But it has to be said, not total, because the center of the Roman battle line, about 10,000 men, have actually broken through the Carthaginian ranks, and they wheel round and they are able to get back to the Roman camp in relatively good order. But nevertheless, I mean, it is a crushing victory. And it is a very, literally chilling warning, because it's icy cold to the Romans of the genius of the enemy that they are facing. And it's chilling, I think, because it's evident that Hannibal has completely thought himself into their sandals. He's worked out the way that they think. He's worked out their strategic muscle memory. He's demonstrated his mastery of surprise, and he has adopted this policy of surrounding a Roman army and then hopefully annihilating it. That was almost successful. It's just the fact that these 10,000 men had managed to break out.
And Sempronius and Scipio both got away, presumably.
They both get away, yes.
Yeah.
And they retreat back to Rome, kind of tails between their legs. And the news is greeted in Rome with real kind of terror, because not only has he now crossed the Alps with elephants, but he's defeated 2 consuls in a pitched battle. So in Rome, there's immense trepidation and depression. But of course, across northern Italy, Cisalpine Gaul, tribes are flocking to his banner. And effectively, northern Italy is now under Hannibal's control. But the question is, Dominic, what will the spring of 217 bring?
That's the question on everybody's lips, Tom. And the answer will be forthcoming after the break.
This episode is brought to you by Rocket Money.
Tom, we often talk about how to organise our finances. I'm very conscious that I'm paying for a lot of mad subscriptions. And there's one thing that we've talked about often on this show. It's the thing that we probably hate more than any other, and it's a hidden fee. I would love to get my finances under control. There are all these things piling up on our bank statements, and I think I need to fix this problem. I need to sort this out and to stop this.
I mean, my finances are so chaotic that I need this app.
So I'll tell you what it is. It's called Rocket Money. It's a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending, and it helps to lower your bills so that you can grow your savings.
With Rocket Money, you can track all of your subscriptions, and you can easily cancel within the app with just a few taps, saving you time, avoiding charges. And you can also set budgets and goals and get personalized insights and regular reports to track how you're doing. They will even send you real-time alerts for large transactions, upcoming bills, refunds, and even low balances. So let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/ishistory.
That's rocketmoney.com/ishistory. rocketmoney.com/ishistory. Hannibal, continuing his advance on Rome, passed through Etruria, burning and ravaging the countryside as he went, his aim being always to lure the Romans into attacking him. Sure enough, he soon saw that Flaminius was coming up fast in his rear. Hannibal continued along the road. To his left now were the hills that stretched beyond the city of Cortona, and to his right was Lake Trasimene. So that was Polybius describing the evening of the 20th of June, 217 BC. So we've moved on 6 months from the Battle of Trebbia, and the scene is now moved from northern Italy to Etruria, the land of the Etruscans, modern-day Tuscany. So we're about 50 miles south of Florence. So, Tom, what's the story? What's Hannibal doing in Tuscany? And who is Flaminius, his adversary at the Battle of Lake Trasimene?
Okay, so Hannibal first. He's won this great victory at Trebbia, but he then hasn't had a brilliant winter, chiefly because all his elephants, bar one, have died, which is very sad. They're just not used to the cold and the snow.
Right.
And the only one that survives is Cyrus, which is the Indian elephant with the one tusk, which Hannibal, from this point on, he's always kind of riding around on it.
Right.
And also, what's disappointing for Hannibal is that although the Gauls have flocked to his banner, there haven't really been any defections in the rest of Italy. And this is despite the fact that at Trebbia, he had treated all his Italian prisoners with very ostentatious clemency, kind of sending them home, even as he keeps the Romans all kind of chained up as prisoners. So obviously, the Italians are not just going to rise up and cast off the Roman yoke. And he realizes, which is always, I guess, he'd taken for granted, that he's going to have to invade and come down southwards towards Rome, try and bring the Romans to another defeat. And despite the fact that he's now lost most of his elephants, he has reasons to feel pretty optimistic. So he's got all the Gauls, thousands and thousands now have flocked to his army, which is pretty much back to the size that it was when he left the Pyrenees, so back up to kind of 50,000 infantry and get 12,000 cavalry. And as ever, he's been keeping tabs on the Romans, and he thinks that things that there are looking pretty good as well. So what of the Romans? Obviously, there are still two consuls. The previous two consuls have stood down. There had been new elections, two new consuls elected. One of them is stationed at Ariminum, which is now Rimini, and he's there to block Hannibal should he try to advance down the eastern side of the Apennines, which is this kind of ridge of mountains running down the spine of Italy. And the other is stationed at Arretium, which is modern-day Arezzo in Tuscany, to block an advance down the western side. And the consul who is stationed at Arretium on the western side is this guy, Flaminius.
And Flaminius is not a nothing person, is he? Because he's got experience of fighting the Gauls, and he's a self-made man. He's not a pampered princeling. He's a man who's prospered by his own efforts.
Well, the Romans call him a novus homo. He's a guy who the first of his family to reach the consulship.
Yeah.
And generally, the Romans are very keen on electing as consuls people from families who have a track record. So it's impressive that Flaminius has kind of made it to the top. And he's done this by, as you said, by subduing a lot of the Gauls in northern Italy. So the Gauls in northern Italy have a real grudge against him. They really, really hate him. Someone else who has a bit of a grudge against him is Polybius.
Okay.
Who doesn't think well of him at all, says that he's a populist, a demagogue with no talent for the practical conduct of war, and exceedingly self-confident. And there's a slight tone of the New York Times writing about a MAGA official in Trump's cabinet about it.
About Pete Hegseth. Is that's how I'm imagining him?
Yeah, that's the kind of vibe, I think. And so, unsurprisingly, Hannibal thinks, well, this is the guy I'm going to target.
I mean, you would. Hegseth is the man you target, right?
Yeah. So what he does, he moves at lightning speed across the Apennines before Flaminius even realizes what's happening. He takes a kind of a path that, again, no one is expecting him to take. It's quite tough and demanding, but by this point his men are used to going up mountains. He then advances through this very kind of marshy swampland around the river that no army had ever thought to cross, and it takes Hannibal's men 4 days to do it. And Hannibal himself, who rides through the swamps on Cyrus, his elephant, he gets an eye infection, and it can't be healed because they're in the middle of a swamp, and so he ends up losing it.
That's a hell of an eye infection. My God.
Yeah, it was clearly pretty serious. And so from this point on, he's like Nelson. He's only got one eye.
Always a good sign, I think, in a commander.
Right. As with Nelson, so with Hannibal, it undoubtedly adds to his allure. And there are Romans who kind of draw up lists of the, generals and enemies that they faced who had one eye. There's actually a surprisingly large number, but they all agree that Hannibal is the top one-eyed enemy that they've had.
It's like an early episode of The Rest is History. History's greatest one-eyed people.
So anyway, Flaminius, he has no idea what's going on. Hannibal is taking roads that no one had ever thought that he would. And so by the time that he clocks the Carthaginians have made it into Etruria, they have passed him and are heading south towards Rome. And again, to quote Polybius, the Carthaginians began to ravage the countryside, and as columns of smoke rose on all sides, bearing witness to the devastation, so the consul became ever more indignant. And the wasting of the land is obviously, it's positive because it means that Hannibal can strip it bare of all its riches and its corn and its livestock and things. But it's also deliberately trying to provoke Flaminius, who is the kind of guy who is very liable to be provoked. He doesn't take kindly to this kind of stuff. So Flaminius doesn't hesitate. He sends word to his colleague saying, cross over the Apennines and we'll catch the Carthaginians in a pincer movement. And he then sets off in hot pursuit. He's not at this moment aiming to force battle. He's only got 2 legions. He's outnumbered pretty much 2-1 by the Carthaginians. But as I say, the aim is that hopefully once the other consul has crossed the Apennines, then they can squeeze Hannibal and kind of get him, surround him. So for this to work, Flaminius can't afford to lose track of the Carthaginians. So Flaminius and his men are tagging the Carthaginian army, and this is the scene with which you opened in the late afternoon of the 20th of June. And the situation is, ahead of Flaminius and his men, the Carthaginians are continuing along this road, which is snaking past this great lake called Trasimene, very, very wide, very deep. And on the other side of the road is, as Polybius describes it, an unbroken line of lofty hills.
Mm-hmm.
So lake on one side, unbroken line of lofty hills on the other, and the road is going between them. Now, Flaminius, I mean, he may be headstrong, but he's not an idiot. He realizes it would be very foolish to take a road like that as the shadows are lengthening. And so he decides to pitch camp on the edge of the lake. And then in the morning, he will see where the Carthaginians are before deciding whether to kind of follow the line of this very narrow road between the lake and the hills. And dawn breaks, and there's a very heavy mist hanging over the lake, and indeed the road and the foothills of the mountains. And Flaminius can't actually see what lies ahead in the road. So he sends his scouts to go clattering down the road. And then they come back and say, yeah, brilliant news. We can see the Carthaginians ahead of us. They've taken the road, and we can see their rear guard, and they're just kind of going over the hills beyond Lake Trasimene. So we really need to get a move on, because otherwise we're going to lose them.
Yeah.
And so Flaminius goes, right, quick, all action stations. Probably they do have time for breakfast this time, but the trumpets are blaring. They're all kind of getting ready, and they start snaking along this road between the lake, the hills kind of rising up on their left, going along. And sure enough, the mist breaks briefly, and Flaminius is able to see that Hannibal's rearguard is still in the process of climbing up the hills from the valley. And so he orders his men forwards, and they engage, and the Roman vanguard crashes into what Flaminius is assuming is Hannibal's rearguard, and the battle begins. But just as it begins, to the horror of Flaminius, to the horror of the Roman column that is now stretched all along the road between the mountains and the lake, they hear the sudden blaring of war trumpets from the mist-swathed heights above them. And then they hear the massed battle cries of some 30,000 men, Africans, Spaniards, and of course, particularly Gauls. And the Gauls, these are people who have real beef with Flaminius. And to quote Polybius on how the Romans react to this unexpected development: the sudden appearance of the enemy took Flaminius completely by surprise. The mist blotted out all visibility, and with the attack being launched from higher ground and from so many points at once, the centurions and military tribunes were not only unable to issue any of the necessary orders, but even to grasp what was happening. They found themselves under attack simultaneously from the front, the flanks, and the rear. So the whole column is being attacked.
So the whole thing was a trick, right? Hannibal had tricked them.
Yeah, it's an ambush. And Hannibal, yet again, has pulled off his favorite stunt, which is to kind of envelop and surround an enemy and then just press in and crush it to death. And the Romans, they are doomed. There is no way they can get out of a trap like this. So they fight hard. I mean, they fight for 3 hours, pretty impressive. But Hannibal's men, who essentially, they had doubled back in the night to take up positions along the line of the hills, and Hannibal had left some of his men to pretend to be the rear guard to tempt the Romans in. So very cunning.
Right.
But there's no way that the Romans can get out of this. Some of them do try wading out into the lake, but again, hopeless. They either drown or they get hunted down by horsemen who come splashing after them. Flaminius himself is cornered by a band of the Gauls whom he had conquered, and they decapitate him and wave the head in triumph. I mean, quite Battle of the Little Bighorn.
Right, yeah.
And the vanguard, so the guys who had been, sent ahead, they do manage to break free of the trap, but it's no good. They're subsequently cornered and taken prisoner. And Flaminius's entire army, 25,000 men, wiped out.
What a twist. What a shock for the Romans.
Oh, complete shock, because the news is brought to Rome, and a magistrate climbs up onto the rostra in the forum to announce to the people the result. So it's, like announcing the football results or something. We have been defeated in a great battle. We have lost 13-0. And there is worse to come, because 3 days later, news arrives in Rome that a force of 4,000 cavalry who'd been sent ahead by, the second consul, who was imagining that he'd be joining up with Flaminius, and he'd been sent it ahead. They've been ambushed, wiped out as well. So terrible news.
So in a massive emergency for the Romans, they presumably now have to take desperate measures.
They do. And fortunately for them, there are provisions within the Constitution of the Republic for such a moment. And essentially what they decide to do is to suspend the rule of the city by the consul, so by the 2 elected magistrates, and to appoint a single man to take their place. And this is this is a very momentous decision because everything about the Roman Republic screams out against any idea of obeying a single leader. It's a kind of legacy of their expulsion of the monarchy. But it isn't, as I say, it's not unconstitutional. Provisions do exist for them to appoint this magistrate who is called, in Latin, dictator, which in English is essentially he who makes the decisions. And by tradition, the dictator serves with the legions on foot. Unlike a normal, a consul would be on a horse, so he could see everything. The dictator is with the mass of the infantry, so he needs a second in command who serves as what is called the master of horse.
Right.
And both the dictator and the master of horse, they only serve for 6 months. And the hope is that within the 6-month period, the crisis can be averted and then everything can go back to normal. And so the person who is appointed dictator is a guy we've already met before, Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucosus Warty, who was the guy who had very possibly gone to Carthage and held up his toga and said, I have peace and war in the folds of this toga, and let slip war.
Yeah, and he was the person who had been a little bit reluctant about rushing into war with the Carthaginians. It'd go too far to call him a dove, but he'd been more cautious than some of his colleagues.
Yeah, so he's celebrated for kind of qualities of prudence and moderation. But you're right, he's certainly not a dove. He's actually a very formidable general. He, again, is a very seasoned Gaul fighter. He'd brought a lot of the tribes in the foothills of the Alps under Rome's rule. He'd celebrated a triumph for it. So he's seen as ideally suited. He's not going to rush into an ambush. He's a proficient general, but more than that, he is emblematic of everything that the Romans admire in a statesman. So he comes from a very distinguished family, unlike poor Flaminius. His own grandfather had served as a dictator in a previous crisis and come out of it very well. He himself is 58 years old, and to the Romans, people in their late 50s, I'm delighted to say, are seen as excellent people to entrust the future of the country to. So basically, he's a man who can be trusted to steady the ship.
Yeah.
So this is agreed. Fabius is inaugurated as dictator in a weird midnight ceremony that's so secret that no one really knows what's going on apart from those who actually officiate. And from that moment on, Fabius is in command of Rome, and he spends his first day making sure that no ritual or ceremony or sacrifice to the gods has been neglected, because the assumption is that the gods are angry, so they need to get the gods on side. Next, he orders the walls of Rome to be repaired and the bridges over the Tiber to be pulled down, so to make the city itself secure. He then sets about recruiting 2 new legions. So Flaminius's 2 legions have been wiped out. They need to be replaced. And he joins them with the 2 legions of the other consul. So now there's a field army of 4 legions, maybe 40,000 men. So about the number that Hannibal has. But he is not intending to engage Hannibal in battle because he realizes that his men they're not sufficiently trained. They're not sufficiently battle hardened. They need to buy time to give these legions time to kind of become sufficiently hardened to fight with the Carthaginians. So instead, his policy is always to shadow Hannibal's men. And I'll quote Plutarch, the great Greek biographer who pairs famous Greeks with famous Romans. And Fabius is one of the famous Romans he writes a biography of. And in that biography, he describes how Fabius shadows Hannibal. If the Carthaginians kept their position, then he did as well. But the moment they moved, he would descend from the heights and draw up his men just far enough away to avoid being drawn into a battle that he had no wish to fight, yet near enough to inspire in Hannibal a fear that he was going to fight at last. And these are obviously very unglamorous tactics, but they're effective. So they can start cutting down enemy foraging parties, picking them off. They can menace Italian cities that might be kind of wavering, might be thinking, oh, yeah, we should sign up to Hannibal. And of course, all the time, he's able to drill and train his raw recruits and to give them experience of being on campaign. So definitely, there are a number of successes being chalked up.
And he's playing a long game, right? He's basically relying on Rome's institutional kind of economic and manpower advantages that in the very long run, as long as he waits and doesn't get tempted into a decisive battle, he will win and Hannibal will lose. That's his thinking.
So it's a difficult one because, as you say, on the one hand, he's playing the long game. But on the other hand, he can't afford to let Rome's reputation be trashed. And this becomes a real issue when Hannibal invades Campania, which is the kind of the rich, wealthy lands that surround Naples, Vesuvius, Pompeii, Capua, those kind of places. And Hannibal just starts stripping it bare and torching the villas and the estates of various Roman luminaries. But Fabius is still not tempted. He insists still, we're going to shadow Hannibal. We're not going to engage in battle. And people in his army, people back in Rome, start to mutter, and they start to give him hostile nicknames. So one of these nicknames is Cunctator, Delayer, and another one is Pedagogus, who is the slave who carries the books of a Roman schoolboy when he's going to school. And Fabius, of course, is aware of this, and all the more so because his leading critic is actually his own deputy, the man he's appointed as master of horse. And this is a former consul called Marcus Minucius Rufus. And matters come to a head when Hannibal needs to leave the Campanian plain. And there's an obvious route for him to take, which Fabius has blocked. So there's a pass, and Fabius has put a garrison to block the pass, and he's stationed his own men on the heights looking down at it. Hannibal is not the kind of guy who's going to be outsmarted by that kind of thing. So he waits until nightfall, and then he orders all his men, and this is a favorite trick, he's already done it, to light torches and to make it look like they are, they've made camp. And then he gets burning torches and he ties them to the horns of a great herd of cattle. And then he whips the cattle up the side of a hill away from the pass. So the sentries on the pass, looking out into the dark, they see these torches starting to move up from the Carthaginian camp up the side of the mountain. And it looks as though this is the route that the Carthaginians are taking, that they're trying to make a breakout in the dead of night. So the garrison on the pass go rushing off to where these torches are blazing, only to find that it's a great herd of cattle. And meanwhile, Hannibal and his men have gone up over the pass and have made their escape.
I mean, if he's played that trick more than once, you have to say the Romans are total mugs to fall for it a second time.
It doesn't look good. And Fabius, of course, is made to look an absolute idiot. And so whisperings against him start to turn to open criticism. And back in Rome, these criticisms are sufficient that Fabius's enemies are able to force a vote which obliges him to share his powers and his legions equally with Minucius. So essentially, dictator and master of horse are now the equivalent of consuls. Both are equally commanding 2 legions. And Hannibal, of course, is delighted by this, because what he wants is a kind of hot-headed Roman commander. And this is exactly what he has with Minucius. And it's not long after Minucius has taken over his 2 legions that he lures Minucius into a trap. It looks like these 2 legions are going to be wiped out. Fabius comes storming down to the rescue. Minucius is rescued. And that evening, very shamefaced, Minucius leads his men to Fabius's headquarters, and he salutes the commander that he had so traduced as father.
Oh, my word. Very embarrassing for Minucius. Yeah.
And very noble moment. Let me be the first, he declares, to abrogate and annul the decree of the people that awarded me the joint command. And then the dictator takes him by the arms and embraces him and confirms him in his post as second of command, as master of horse. So very, very noble. And the 6 months of Fabius's appointment as dictator pass, and there are no more engagements, and people, even back in Rome, accept that for the now, his strategy has probably been a good one. But when he lays down his dictatorship, I don't think there's any feeling in Rome, and probably even Fabius doesn't think it, that it would be sensible to carry on this policy, to perpetuate it. Essentially, Fabius's dictatorship was all about buying time, about recruiting, training more legions, and then hopefully engage Hannibal in a great battle and wipe him out, because that's what Romans do. They engage their enemies in battles and they annihilate them. And Dominic, as you keep reminding us, the key to Rome's greatness is its manpower. And I think the thinking in Rome is, well, this is the superpower we have to harness. We have to recruit and arm and train an army that is so vast, so formidable, that there can be no prospect of Hannibal defeating it.
So on the 1st of January 216, Tom, 2 new consuls take up office, and ahead lies the great showdown with Hannibal, because everybody expects, don't they, that in the new year there will be a 3rd pitched battle against the Carthaginians And this time, surely the Romans will be victorious. And whether they are victorious, we will find out in the next episode. Now, in a startling innovation, we've started a club called the Rest is History Club. And if you join that club, you can hear that episode, the Battle of Cannae, one of the most dramatic battles, not just in ancient history, but in all history. You can hear that episode right now if you're a member of the Rest is History Club.
That's amazing value, Dominic.
Oh, it's the value is off the scale. It is such good value because you get ad-free listening. You get a load of benefits that, I mean, so glittering.
God, I might sign up for it.
Yeah, I mean, I've signed up multiple times, actually, because I love it so much. Anyway, you can join this club at therestishistory.com. And whether you join it or not, we will be back next time with the most dramatic and thrilling and unexpected battle in all history, the Battle of Cannae. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.